Worry feels like it's keeping you protected, safe, and prepared. But the truth is, these things are actually keeping you stuck. In this video, I'm going to expose 5 worry myths that aren't really helping you. The more you can understand this, the more you can shift the way you're responding to your worry. Okay, let's jump in. We all worry. To be human is to worry at times, especially about the things that we really care about. That's not really the issue. The issue is really the way we respond to worry, or really the beliefs or stories we have about worry. So some of these myths that really encourage you to respond to worry in a way that are unhelpful. Myth number 1, worry keeps me prepared. So this is such a common myth when it comes to worry. I see this all the time with people that I work with. This sense that the more they can worry, the more they can be prepared for things, right? And I always give the distinctions with people that I work with. There's such a thing as like helpful planning, and then when it crosses over to just endless worry, and then it's not really keeping you prepared. Because if you really think about it, what happens is if you believe that the more you worry, you can be prepared, the thing is like your mind is really skilled and it'll come up with like endless scenarios, and it'll like tweak one detail, change something, and it can really keep you stuck in just thinking about all these potential scenarios. The other thing that really happens is that when you believe that worry is keeping you prepared, a lot of times you tend to just focus on the potential negative outcome or this catastrophizing or worst case scenario. I see this a lot with people who struggle with worry. They really have this sense that that worst case scenario could realistically happen. And listen, it could, and depending on the situation, I always tell this to people I work with, some of this is out of your control. But the truth is, like, sure, that could happen, but there's also the possibility that other things could happen that aren't as reactive or aren't as difficult for you. And a lot of times this worry just kind of keeps you stuck in this like analysis paralysis and not really taking action, and just kind of amps up this feeling. And so really acknowledging like how much time and effort and energy you're wasting worrying, thinking about this scenario because you think it's going to keep you prepared. And the reality, it's like, how prepared does it really make you? Does it change the scenario at all? And again, you can do some helpful planning, but at some point you have to let go of the control. Myth number 2, I can think my way out of worry. So this is another one where I really see people believing in the sense that the more I can think about it, then eventually I can lay it to rest and stop worrying. And some people can do that, but especially if you struggle with excessive worry, what typically happens is that you just keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And a lot of times what happens is, in a weird way, worry becomes this way that you avoid feeling uncomfortable, right? Because when we think about worry, worry is something that's happening in your mind, right? There's like a cognitive component of like you're thinking about something, but it causes you to have an emotional reaction that feels really uncomfortable. Anxiety, fear, lack of control, uncertainty, things like that. And so a lot of times what we do, we think, well, like I can think my way out of feeling this really uncomfortable thing. And so in a weird way, that thinking starts to become this avoidance of the feeling. But really all it does, it just keeps you stuck in that excessive cycle. So it's really starting to break that worry loop and recognize that, like, what do I have to make room for here? What do I have to accept that feels really uncomfortable? And how can I really acknowledge that the more I think about it, it's not really going to help? Again, because if we go back to that first myth, like I said, some helpful planning might be helpful, but at some point there's this recognition that if you keep thinking about it, it's not going to make the feeling go away, right? Because something about this is important to you, it's scary, it's uncomfortable, and that's normal. But can we lean into some of that discomfort? If you ever believe this myth that you can think your way out of worry, hit like to let me know that this is a really pervasive myth out there. Myth number 3, worry is just part of who I am. So I see this often in this sense that like worry is like hardwired into someone's personality. And listen, I'm not saying that there aren't predispositions to anxiety and things like that, or some people are a little bit more neurotic. I get that. But I think there's also this understanding and really helpful recognition that a lot of worry is learned behavior as well. So if you think about not only what you modeled and what you saw growing up, but then how you start to respond to your worry, right? Because like I said earlier, we all worry to worry is to be human, but then there's things that we do that keep us really stuck in this worry cycle, or things that we do, avoidance, moving away from things that actually really amplify worry. So the more you believe, though, this myth that this is just who I am, the more it's going to be harder for you to switch that. Because if you think this is just like hardwired into like, I'm a brunette, there's nothing I can really do right outside of dyeing my hair, but that, like there's nothing like if I stop dyeing my hair, I will always be a brunette. Like the more you're going to then just feel like it's out of your control. So the more you can start to acknowledge, like, sure, maybe I have more of a predisposition to anxiety, fine, but the more that you can recognize that there are things that you can do that are in your control can feel really empowering, because the more you can recognize that the way you're responding to worry and even the stories that you believe about worry are actually counterintuitive and keeping you stuck, the more you can recognize that there's things in your control that you can do to change. Myth number 4, worrying helps me avoid disappointment. So this is a really common one that I see, this sense that people believe that the more I can worry about something and expect disappointment or expect the failure, the more I'll be prepared when it happens. Again, outside of that initial helpful planning, I don't know how real this is, because the truth is, if you experience a disappointment or a failure, it's human in that moment that you're going to have a reaction, right? Like you're still going to be like feeling something because you're human. And a lot of times what it really happens is that you just experience disappointment or these feelings twice, because the truth is it might not even happen. Like that disappointment or failure or whatever scenario you're painting might not come to fruition, but because your mind has painted it before, so you're already experiencing that as if it's true. The other thing that can really happen with this is that it really takes the joy away from being present or enjoying the process of something versus just the outcome. So let's say you're preparing for a presentation that you're really excited about, and it's really value aligned to you, but you're so focused on the negative outcome or the disappointment or the failure that could happen that it really steals the joy from just being part of the process, right? Because you're so focused on this potential outcome that your mind says is really going to happen, but the truth is that you don't know if it's going to happen, right? So it's kind of that saying, plan for the worst, hope for the best. But in my experience, a lot of people just do the first part and forget the second part. They don't hope for the best, or they don't really kind of balance out this perspective. So just really notice that. Really notice if this myth really does anything for you. Type yes in the comments below if you've ever bought into this myth that worrying will somehow prevent disappointment or soften the blow. Myth number 5, worrying motivates me to do better. So this is a really common one, this sense of, if I don't worry at all, I'm not gonna have any fuel or motivation to do better. And a lot of times I really will think about a lot of times it really help people understand kind of this classic bell curve chart of the relationship between optimal performance and anxiety, right? So of course, having like no stress about something isn't helpful either, right? So we can think about that student who doesn't prepare at all for finals, isn't worried about it, doesn't care, and then they flunk like no surprise because there was no kind of sense of urgency to prepare. But the flip side of that, right? It's like having too much worry doesn't help either. That actually doesn't help with performance either. In my experience, that leads to a lot of procrastination. That leads to a lot of like overthinking, really spending a lot of time on a project, but really having minimal output. So like you stare at a computer and you just there for 2 or 3 hours trying to perfect it or getting just right or worrying about it, but you maybe produced a paragraph, right? So we really want to think about like how much this is really prepare us. And there's other ways, like sure, you can have some type of helpful stress, but like when it starts to get into these realms of excessive worry, how much does it really help you? These myths about worries that they can protect you, that it motivates you, that it will somehow prevent disappointment are all just that myths. And in reality, they're probably draining your energy and keeping you stuck. But this is the thing, the more you realize they're just myths and you can shift them, now you're on the path to doing something different. Watch this next video where I give you one actionable tool, simple, that you can start to do to really shift your relationship with worry. And like I always say, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you. Thanks, guys.